Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Bold and Beautiful. Today, Bill promises to hold Grace accountable for her lies. Eventually, Bill Spencer will discover that Grace Buckingham has defrauded him of his fortune. When the truth is out, Bill will impatiently lie into Grace because he is determined to make her pay. Will Bill hold Grace accountable for her falsehoods? Spencer, Bill, I just found out. When Bill learned that Liam Spencer had been shot, he was unaware that Liam had a brain tumor. Naturally, Bill has already heard how everyone in LA is to blame for Luna Nozawa's release. Liam's gunshot while attempting to save Steffy Forrester is also Luna's fault. Bill is desperate to find out what happened to Liam, who was miraculously cured of an inoperable tumor. According to John Finnegan, Bill has been informed that this is not the typical outcome of these tumors. Bill thinks this is a miracle right now, but he will soon realize that something is wrong. John Finnegan is worried about. Finn is quite worried about the test findings and is on the verge of losing faith in Liam's ability to recover. Finn is aware that if anything seems too good to be true, it's probably not. Finn also thinks it's odd that Grace let Liam return home so soon. Finn has no faith whatsoever in this miracle recovery. Finn might need to learn the truth regarding Liam's recuperation and tell Bill the whole story. Even though Bill isn't Finn's favorite person at the moment, he has a right to know what's happening. If Grace has lied about this malignancy, causing Liam to endure unnecessary suffering and medication, what will Bill do? Bill Spencer and Grace Buckingham face off. Lately, Bill has been quite soft-spoken about facing people. Bill is going to be determined to find answers now that he has learned that this has caused Liam pain. He will not tolerate Grace using his son to enrich himself. Grace will pay for all of the hardships she has caused Liam and the rest of the family. After informing his girls that he would not be leaving, Liam will undoubtedly die if he has not been cured. Will Grace's falsehoods cause Liam's family to still have to deal with his death? Is the tumor that initiated this entire plot still there in Liam? Has Grace misled you about Bill Spencer's consciousness? This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a calculated, cold-blooded assault on his family, a $1 million heist woven from lies that exploited his son Liam's most profound vulnerability, his very life. Bill, who had initially been rendered uncharacteristically subdued, even mushy, by the sheer terror of Liam's brush with death after the shooting and the subsequent diagnosis of an inoperable brain tumor, a diagnosis that had landed like a death sentence, amplifying Bill's existing guilt over unleashing Luna Nozawa's chaos, a chaos that indirectly led to Liam taking a bullet for Steffy, now felt a seismic fury erupting within him, a fury hotter than any he'd ever known, fueled by the cataclysmic revelation that Grace Buckingham, the woman entrusted with Liam's neurological salvation, had not only potentially fabricated the tumor's existence but had certainly lied about its miraculous, unprecedented disappearance, manipulating test results and orchestrating a recovery narrative so flawless it defied medical logic solely to line her own pockets, draining a staggering $1 million from him under the pretense of cutting-edge, life-saving treatment while subjecting Liam to a harrowing gauntlet of unnecessary, potentially harmful medications and the unbearable psychological torture of believing he was dying, only to be granted a reprieve so sudden it now reeked of fraud. The initial wave of relief Bill had clung to, the sheer, tearful gratitude for what he'd believed was divine intervention sparing his son, a miracle that briefly softened his hardened edges, curdled instantly into a toxic brew of rage, humiliation, and a predatory determination colder than steel. This wasn't just about the money, though the sheer audacity of the theft ignited his Spencer pride. It was about Grace playing God with Liam's life, turning his suffering into a lucrative con. Exploiting Bill's desperation and love for his child as a weakness to be monetized, and forcing Liam, in a moment of profound relief and hope, to look his precious daughters in the eye and promise he wasn't going anywhere, a promise now hanging by the thinnest, most treacherous thread spun from Grace's avaricious lies. Bill Spencer, the dormant volcano known as Dollar Bill, was awakening, and his singular, terrifying focus was crystallizing with laser intensity. Grace Buckingham would pay, not just financially, but comprehensively, devastatingly, for every agonizing moment she inflicted upon Liam, for every tear shed by Hope and the girls, for the collective trauma she callously engineered, and for the monstrous gamble she took with a life Bill cherished above all else, a life potentially still hanging in the balance thanks to her. This conviction wasn't mere anger, it was a vow etched in ice, a promise of retribution that promised to eclipse any business rivalry or personal feud he'd ever waged, fueled by the terrifying uncertainty Finn's profound medical skepticism had meticulously sown. Dr. John Finn Finnegan's persistent, deeply troubled voice echoed relentlessly in Bill's mind, transforming from background medical caution into the chilling soundtrack of this unfolding nightmare. Finn, from the very first moment Liam walked out of Grace's care proclaiming a cure, had been the lone, unwavering voice of scientific reason, his brow perpetually furrowed with concern that bordered on dread. The test results Grace presented, showing the complete and inexplicable vanquishing of an inoperable glioblastoma, flew so violently in the face of established oncology that Finn found them not just improbable, but fundamentally wrong, a violation of everything medicine understood about such aggressive malignancies. Tumors simply didn't vanish overnight without trace, especially not under the questionable, opaque protocols Grace employed. Finn's instinct screamed that something was profoundly amiss, a sentiment crystallized by Grace's astonishingly reckless decision to discharge Liam almost immediately after announcing the miracle, a move so clinically irresponsible it bordered on grotesque, severing Liam from essential monitoring during what should have been a critical, fragile recovery phase. It wasn't just haste, it felt like a calculated effort to remove Liam from scrutiny, to prevent deeper, independent investigation that might expose the charade. Finn's professional integrity warred with his personal distaste for Bill Spencer, a man whose past actions had earned him little goodwill, but the ethical imperative was undeniable. Liam's actual health, the very real possibility that the tumor still lurked, malignant and deadly, or that the treatment itself had inflicted unseen damage, outweighed any animosity. The thought that Liam might have endured weeks of toxic pharmaceuticals, debilitating side effects, and soul-crushing fear for nothing, or worse, that he remained terminally ill, blissfully unaware because Grace silenced the truth for profit, was an abomination Finn couldn't ignore. He knew, with grim certainty, that he would have to delve deeper, to demand original scans, retest samples, and ultimately, confront the horrifying possibility that Grace Buckingham had orchestrated a medical fraud of staggering cruelty, a fraud that, once confirmed, he would be ethically bound to reveal to Bill Spencer, the man whose paternal fury was already a tangible force gathering like a storm front. Finn understood the powder keg he might be handing Bill, but the alternative, allowing Liam to potentially die because a lie went unchallenged, or allowing Grace to profit from such monstrous deceit, was unthinkable. The potential consequences of Grace's actions weren't abstract financial losses or bruised egos, they were measured in the terrified eyes of Liam's daughters, the fragile hope trembling in Hope's voice, the phantom pain Liam might still be feeling, and the horrifying specter of a death sentence merely postponed by deceit. If Finn's worst fears were confirmed, if Grace had falsified the initial diagnosis or the miraculous cure, or, most horrifyingly, both, then Liam Spencer was still a dying man, living on borrowed time purchased with his father's $1 million and his own excruciating suffering. That moment when Liam, buoyed by Grace's lie, assured his girls he would stay with them, became not a promise, but a cruel setup for an even more devastating loss. The Spencer and Forrester families, having endured the emotional whiplash of near loss, desperate hope, and jubilant relief, would be plunged back into an abyss of grief, but this time poisoned by the knowledge that their precious time together had been stolen not just by disease, but by the venal greed of a trusted physician. Every headache Liam experienced, every moment of fatigue, would now be viewed through a lens of terrifying suspicion, a constant, gnawing fear that the tumor Grace claimed vanished was silently reclaiming its territory. Bill's rage, already volcanic, would be incalculable if he learned Grace's lies directly led to Liam succumbing to a tumor she either invented or failed to treat, effectively murdering his son through negligence and fraud after taking his money. The question hanging over them all, does Liam still have the tumor? Was no longer just a medical mystery, it was the sword of Damocles suspended by Grace Buckingham's threat of lies, its fall potentially orchestrated by her avarice. Bill Spencer, armed with the dawning realization of her treachery and Finn's impending confirmation, was no longer the momentarily softened patriarch, he was Dollar Bill reforged in the fires of betrayal, his gaze fixed unblinkingly on Grace Buckingham, his mind meticulously calculating the precise currency of her downfall. He wouldn't merely sue, He would dismantle her reputation, expose her to criminal prosecution, destroy her financially, and ensure her name became synonymous with medical malpractice and heartless exploitation. The quiet before the storm was over. The air crackled with the imminent, violent collision of Bill Spencer's vowed vengeance and Grace Buckingham's house of cards, a confrontation promising not just repayment, but utter ruination for the lies that dared to gamble with a Spencer's life. The only question remaining was not if Bill would make Grace pay, but how cataclysmic the final reckoning would be. Dollar Bill's fury, Grace's exposé, $1 million for a false tumor? Someone will demand answers because Liam Spencer's tumor was a hoax and Grace Buckingham really did pull off a scam. But the most enraged member of Liam's inner circle will vent his rage on Grace. Dollar Bill Spencer spent millions of dollars to remove a fictitious tumor? There are already questions being asked. Dr. John Finn Finnegan and Bridget Forrester, the other medical professionals who treated Liam, are already wary and inquisitive. Bridget was not happy. Grace approved Liam's release, but she and Finn are both curious about how Liam's incurable tumor was removed, through an experimental treatment or not. Bill called it a miracle when Finn admitted to him that he had seen Liam's most recent MRI scan following his experimental procedure and that it was clear. However, they are unable to comprehend how uncommon it was for a patient to have an incurable tumor removed without suffering any negative consequences. Additionally, neither Finn nor Bridget were familiar with the Dr. Adhikari who helped Grace in the clinic where Liam was brought. The suspicions are shared by Finn. Both Bridget and Finn recall how evasive Grace was when Liam was first brought to the hospital, which adds credence to the suspicions about her and what actually happened to Liam. All of the prior MRI scans appeared to have been performed covertly. Liam was receiving a lot of medication, and she didn't want anyone else involved in his situation. Because Finn wanted to watch over him, Liam had spent a lot of time with Finn and Steffi Forrester. Finn is aware of the story, even though he was not part of the family when Grace's husband, Reese Buckingham, and others conspired in the Beth Spencer case. When Bridget and Finn figure out the mystery, Bill is furious and breaks down in tears. Bridget and Finn figure out the riddle by closely examining Liam's medical records, particularly the MRI scans performed at their facility. Grace is in serious jeopardy. It's unclear why she changed Liam's scans for those of another patient and fabricated Liam's records. However, since Bill covered the cost of the surgery, they talked to him privately. They will handle Grace's medical misconduct through the proper procedures. Although it's decided not to bring up the deception with Liam or any of his relatives, Bill lashes out at Grace. The financial documents will undoubtedly be presented in court, but it's too late to get his $1 million back. Dr. Grace Buckingham, a facade woven with falsified medical records, phantom tumors, and a staggering $1 million price tag extracted from the city's most notoriously volatile financier, Dollar Bill Spencer, was unraveling with terrifying speed, its intricate threads pulled apart by the persistent, ethically driven scrutiny of Dr. Bridget Forrester and Dr. John Finn Finnegan, whose initial professional unease had crystallized into cold, hard suspicion, morphing from clinical curiosity into a dogged pursuit of truth that would inevitably detonate with the force of a financial grenade in the opulent confines of Spencer Publications, leaving Grace exposed, defenseless, and facing the white-hot, incandescent fury of a man who had been played for the ultimate fool, paying a king's ransom to excise a malignancy that had never existed outside the bounds of Grace Buckingham's audacious, perilous scheme. The seeds of doubt, sown almost from the moment Liam Spencer, pale and trembling, was first admitted under Grace's exclusive, almost possessive care, had finally germinated into undeniable revelation. Bridget's profound professional offense at Grace cavalierly signing off on Liam's release against all established medical caution regarding his supposedly inoperable brainstem tumor had been the first crack, a fissure widened exponentially by the sheer, bewildering implausibility of Liam's miraculous recovery. How, Finn and Bridget relentlessly probed in hushed, intense conversations held in cramped on-call rooms or over late-night coffees amidst the hum of hospital machinery, could a tumor declared by multiple experts, including themselves after reviewing the initial, grainy scans Grace provided, a surgically inaccessible due to its treacherous location, simply vanish? An experimental procedure performed at a clandestine clinic, assisted by a phantom specialist, Dr. Adhikari, whose credentials dissolved into mist upon the slightest inquiry, leaving no trace in reputable medical databases, no published research, no corroborating colleagues. It reeked not of medical breakthrough, but of elaborate charade. Finn, despite his initial awestruck concession to Bill Spencer in the aftermath, acknowledging the astonishingly clear post-op MRI Bill hailed as a miracle, found that word-curdling in his stomach. True miracles in medicine were rare, often built upon years of research and verifiable evidence, not shrouded in secrecy and evasive answers. Bridget, her maternal instincts towards her cousin Liam intertwining with her fierce Hippocratic integrity, couldn't shake the memory of Grace's almost panicked resistance to any collaboration during Liam's initial crisis, her insistence on sole control, her dismissal of second opinions, the peculiar secrecy surrounding the procurement of Liam's previous MRI scans seemingly conjured from thin air rather than ordered through standard hospital channels, and the bafflingly complex cocktail of pills Liam was reportedly ingesting under Grace's direction, pills whose necessity for a terminal diagnosis seemed incongruous with palliative care norms. Finn, recalling the weeks Liam spent under his and Steffi's roof, remembered the profound helplessness, the vigil kept for a man seemingly doomed, a narrative meticulously reinforced by Grace's grave pronouncements, though Finn hadn't been part of the Forrester family during the earlier, infamous Beth deception orchestrated by Grace's own husband, Reese Buckingham, the chilling parallels, the exploitation of medical trust, the manipulation of vulnerable families, the breathtaking scale of the lie, were not lost on him, adding a layer of grim historical precedent to their growing apprehension. This shared, deepening unease transformed into focused investigation, bypassing Grace entirely. Finn and Bridget became medical detectives, their quarry the truth buried within Liam's electronic health records and, crucially, the physical MRI scans archived in the hospital's radiology department. They pored over pixels and data streams, cross-referencing dates, protocols, patient identifiers embedded deep within the DICOM data, the digital fingerprints of each scan. Their meticulous analysis, fueled by sleepless nights and a profound sense of ethical duty, yielded the irrefutable, damning evidence, the preoperative scans showing the terrifying, inoperable mass threatening Liam's life, the very scans Grace used to justify the experimental surgery and extract Bill's fortune, were not Liam Spencer's. They belonged to another, tragically ill patient, their harrowing diagnosis digitally stolen and superimposed onto Liam's file. The post-operative miracle scan? Likely either fabricated or, more brazenly, simply Liam's own, perfectly healthy brain scan from before the entire fabricated crisis began. Grace hadn't just misdiagnosed, she had engineered a complete medical fiction, falsifying records on an industrial scale, constructing a narrative of terminal illness and miraculous salvation out of whole cloth and stolen suffering. The motive remained shrouded. Was it pure, staggering greed targeting Bill's deep pockets? A twisted attempt to manipulate family dynamics, perhaps reunite Liam and Steffi through shared trauma? Or something darker, a psychological compulsion born from the shadow of her husband's past crimes? The why was a puzzle for later, the what was incontrovertible fraud, medical malfeasance of the highest, most reprehensible order. United in their horror and resolve, Bridget and Finn moved with steely professionalism. Confronting Grace directly in the volatile hospital environment was too risky. Instead, they arranged a discreet, private meeting with the man most catastrophically defrauded, the man whose volcanic temper was legendary, Dollar Bill Spencer. In the imposing, silent grandeur of Bill's office, surrounded by symbols of his immense power and wealth, the doctors laid out their findings with clinical precision, presenting the digital evidence, explaining the scan swaps, the phantom doctor, the impossibility of the cure, the sheer, breathtaking scope of the deception. They assured him the hospital and medical boards would handle Grace's professional annihilation, the revocation of her license, the inevitable criminal charges for fraud and falsifying medical records, ensuring she faced the full, crushing weight of institutional justice through proper medical and legal channels. They advocated, successfully, for shielding Liam, Hope, Steffi, and the wider family from the soul-crushing truth of the fraud. Liam had endured enough real trauma, learning his miracle was built on $1 million lie and his own psychological torture would be an unnecessary, devastating cruelty. But for Bill Spencer? shielding was impossible. The revelation detonated within him like a silent supernova. The $1 million, a sum insignificant in the vast ocean of his wealth yet symbolically colossal, paid not for life-saving expertise, but for a grotesque pantomime. Paid to a woman who had looked him in the eye, exploited his desperation for his son, and spun a tale so convincing it parted him from his money with the ease of picking a fool's pocket. The humiliation was absolute, corrosive. It wasn't just the money, it was the utter contempt the scam represented, the manipulation of a Spencer, the violation of his fiercely guarded, albeit complex, paternal instincts. The calm with which he absorbed the doctor's final words was the terrifying stillness before the eruption. When they departed, leaving him alone with the evidence of his own monumental gullibility, the dam holding back Dollar Bill Spencer's legendary wrath shattered completely. Grace Buckingham, summoned under false pretenses or perhaps sensing the inevitable reckoning and foolishly hoping to brazen it out, walked into the maelstrom. Bill's fury wasn't shouted. Initially, it was a low, guttural growl, a predator cornering its prey, his eyes glacial chips of blue steel boring into hers, stripping away every pretense, every possible justification before a single word of defense could leave her lips. Then the storm broke. His voice, usually commanding and controlled, rose in a crescendo of raw, unfiltered rage, each word a scalpel lacerating her professional facade, exposing the grubby reality beneath. $1 million, Grace. $1 million. For what? A script? A performance? A goddamn story you concocted while my son thought he was dying? You sat there, playing God with his life, with my head, feeding me lines about miracles and experimental procedures, and all along it was fake? The tumor was fake? Spittle flew as he advanced, his imposing frame radiating lethal energy, the air crackling with the threat of physical violence barely contained. He detailed the evidence, throwing the doctor's findings at her like acid, relishing the flinch as each falsified scan, each lie about Adhikari, each manipulated record was hurled back in her face. You think you're clever? You think you outsmarted Dollar Bill? You used my fear for my son, Grace. As a fucking ATM. You're not a doctor, you're a con artist, a grifter in a lab coat. A cheap, greedy fraud preying on a family's worst nightmare. The financial records, the wire transfer proof of his payment for her fictional surgery, would be Exhibit A in the coming legal onslaught, he snarled, a weapon forged from his own coerced contribution to her scheme. Getting the money back was impossible, he knew, likely already spent or hidden, but that was almost irrelevant now. The loss was a minor sting compared to the searing brand of humiliation and betrayal. His vengeance wouldn't be financial recovery, it would be utter, comprehensive destruction. Your career is over, he hissed, the finality in his tone absolute, terrifying. Finished. Erased. By the time the medical board, the prosecutors, and I am done with you, you won't be able to get a job taking blood pressure in a vet's office. You will face every charge, every consequence, and I will personally ensure it hurts. You stole $1 million? I'm going to cost you everything you have, everything you are, and then some. Get out. Get out before I do something permanent. Grace Buckingham, the architect of the grand deception, stood exposed not just as a fraud, but as the target of Dollar Bill Spencer's unleashed, apocalyptic wrath, a wrath forged in the white-hot furnace of paternal fear exploited and monumental pride shattered, a wrath as costly and destructive as the fictional tumor that had ignited it, leaving her medical future in ashes and her present trembling in the shadow of a billionaire's unquenchable fury. The exposé was complete, the scam laid bare, and the only miracle left was Grace surviving the encounter unscathed, a miracle conspicuously absent from her own malicious script.